Welcome to the five of us. We are five outspoken women with close to 150 years of experience as broadcast journalists. We left our jobs on the very same day, and we are dedicated to helping women avoid the many pitfalls common to the workplace. We've heard from hundreds of people recounting tales of woe on the job, and we have done the research. We're putting it all in a book, and we are here to help. I'm Roma Torrey, and along with Kristen Shaughnessy, Janine Ramirez, Vivian Lee, and Amanda Farinacci, we are the five of us. Hi, everyone. 'Tis the season to get laid off. Doesn't it seem like every big name company, and I'm including the tech giants, are sending out pink slips to thousands this year? I know it happens, every year, but to this extent, and in some cases, it's tens of thousands. And considering the timing of all of this, getting laid off during the holidays, gosh, that's really rude. So for today's episode, we're going to discuss the ramifications of all of these layoffs. And we're going to specifically focus on particular age groups, because obviously the experience of being laid off is going to depend in a large part on how old you are, how many years of experience, your savings, how much you've been able to squirrel away in savings, and your ability to transfer your skills from one job to another. So we're going to begin though with Kristen Shaughnessy, because this whole topic was your idea, and it is a brilliant one, because it just seems like everybody's laying off thousands of workers. And so discuss for us, first of all, Kristen, why is it happening now, and how extensive is it?
I think we still haven't even felt the worst of it yet. Perhaps, in November, we started hearing about thousands of layoffs. We're talking about Meta. They had 11,000 layoffs they announced. Lyft, about 13% of its workforce. Amazon expects to lay off about 10,000 total. And just this week,
Twitter half, right?
Yes. And then Pepsi this week announcing they will be laying off hundreds of workers. And I think the biggest thing about layoffs is it's kind of seems sudden to all of us, but these are very planned events. These start happening months before we actually hear about it in public. And so really the only person who might be surprised are the actual employees who are getting laid off. And as you mentioned, during the holiday season, it makes it particularly tough. But sometimes they're even given a code name, like a project name, so that managers or the C-suite can talk about it and nobody really knows what they're saying. And a date is really chosen for when it's going to happen. It's basically a script that happens. They have to decide who's going to be laid off, how they're going to be told. It goes through legal, and then there's an all-hands emergency meeting, and then they give the news. And then a week later, it's designed so that if you're still surviving, you should feel lucky to have a job. Right. And then you want to work harder. It's the holiday season. People might be planning on vacation. You can't take a vacation when other people are getting laid off. So it's a real problem for the American workforce.
No, really, to get blindsided, though, during the holidays. Why do they have to pick this time of year?
Well, this is the time when you're looking at stock prices, right? And earnings reports are coming out. And if the stock price is down, well, that's the CEO's pay is reflective of that. So one of the easiest ways is to have layoffs, right? That's an easier way than, say, selling real estate or something like that, particularly in this market.
It just seems cruel. And, just on a personal note, I have to tell you, in one of my former employers did something that seemed just so rude, honestly. They sent out their supervisors to lay off a bunch of people, and then the supervisors were laid off by their bosses. And
after they laid off people,
the bosses were laid off by their bosses. And, they sent out individual people to do their dirty work so that they didn't have to, face the poor staff members who were losing their jobs. It seemed really, really rude.
Right. But sometimes employees shouldn't be so surprised by layoffs. Sometimes there's like writing on the wall that you should have been looking at a long time ago, right? In the case of CNN, change of management at the top, and now look at all the CNN layoffs right now. So they weren't given 24-hour notice. This was months in the making, and do you think you're going to be the only one to survive? Probably not. So you kind of have to say, like, this is what's happening across the country. I might be next.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, this time of year, even though it's the holidays and it seems like such a rude thing to do, as you characterized it, Roma, it's also the end of the fiscal year, right?
Right.
So they're looking forward to the next fiscal year and how to make it, a healthier bottom line for the company. And so it's kind of a time of year that workers should probably start to tune into more, like what's been going on in the company or in my division and what could be coming up. But I mean, this round seems like a major correction, because a lot of these companies that have announced recent layoffs were also beefing up their ranks during the pandemic. They were counting on certain things happening in the economy, and then they had to redirect, which meant, of course, like a human toll in a lot of ways.
Big Netflix, right? Because everybody was home during the pandemic and streaming and buying the service because everybody was stuck at home. And then when people started going out more, Netflix started to lose money, subscribers, and they started doing layoffs as well.
Same with Peloton, same thing.
Yeah, Peloton.
Big companies. Yep.
I mean, obviously the economy is dictating this. It just seems that as Kristen said, the first line of fire is, the poor employee, when they could cut back in other areas. So again, it's the corporate mind, the bottom line is profit, the profit motive. I was, looking through some of the experts asking, what should an individual do when they're facing a layoff? And there are three basic areas that you should consider first and foremost. The first one is sign up for unemployment. The second one is figure out how are you going to get health insurance. Maybe your company is offering some kind of COBRA assistance. And then take stock of your retirement money. Maybe you can roll your 401k into an IRA, but it might be a good idea if you are laid off to try to find a financial planner or financial advisor to help you. And I should also point out, a lot of people, and my daughter was included in all of this, who were working remotely with another company that's out of state. When you're trying to file for unemployment, who's going to pay it? Is it the state where you're living and working, or is it the state that where the business is operating out of? A lot of people are getting fooled and the runaround when they're trying to file for unemployment. So that's something to consider. But why don't we start with the youngest group, the 20-somethings? And Amanda, let's begin with you, because we're going to follow the age. So you, as the youngest, you can talk about what happens to a 20-something when they're let go from their jobs and they really haven't saved a whole lot of money.
Yeah, that's really daunting, right? I mean, the good news is you're only 20-something, right? So like, you'll be fine. Chances are very likely that it will work to your favor, right? But there's still the same panic that will set in where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I lost my job. What am I going to do now? I think that a good rule of thumb is to just sort of stop for a second and kind of assess what you have, where you are. Is it time for you to move home with your parents for a little while? Do you want to consider going to grad school? Do you want to consider a career path? A different career path? Are you happy where you are? I think in any age group, it's probably universal advice that being laid off is a good time to take stock of where you are, but especially for people who are younger and just the beginning of their career, because they're not as vested. I've read a lot of like blog accounts and, first person stories of people who this happened to, and like every single one has the same theme, that it was like a blessing in disguise, because it forced somebody who maybe out of college took the job that they thought was going to be the job and the career that they want, and then maybe experienced it for a little while and thought maybe not, maybe I want to shift here. It's a good time to do that, but it is daunting because, as you mentioned, the health insurance stuff is a big issue. If you're under 26, I think you can still be on your parents' COBRA, which is maybe a lifesaver for people, but not everybody is, right? Maybe you're 27, you're not yet 30. The point is, at the beginning of your career, or the beginning of when you're in your early 20s, there's a lot of time to kind of mess around. I think that's kind of like you guys have, your kids are like in this area, right? Where you're kind of working, but you're still like have a pretty active social life. And you got to figure out how you're going to maintain that without having cash, right? So I don't know, actually this happened to a cousin of mine. And she kind of just like took a chill and then took a job someplace where she didn't really think, just to pay her bills, and then reassessed and wound up taking a job someplace else. And I think that's a good kind of metric for just take a deep breath. I mean, the good news is you've got 40 or 50 years, hopefully, of work ahead of you. You've got a long career ahead of you. So, and you know what, we've talked about this so much on the podcast. People don't keep these jobs for as long as maybe we were accustomed to, right? So like all of a sudden your 25-year job is not your 25-year job. Maybe it's your 1-year job, or maybe even less. Depends, and you just got to go with it. I think when you're young and you're sort of resilient out of school, you're definitely in the best shape to, you know, progress and move on. It's just a slight bump in the road.
So when you move into your 30s, then you have more responsibilities in your life. You want to own things. Maybe you're looking to buy a house. And so I think generally speaking, people tend to get a little bit more conservative about their decisions because they want to make some more money. So Vivian, I'm going to ask you, what's the advice for 30-somethings who are suddenly laid off?
Well, let's first think about who these 30-somethings are today, because I remember what it was like to be 30-something, but that was some time ago. Today, they're millennials. And millennials have had a pretty bum rap when it comes to their economic outlook. Like from the moment they entered the workforce, when they came of age, shortly after the mortgage housing crisis, after President Obama took office, the economy tanked. It looked horrible. There were millions of layoffs then too. And they had a rough start. And so they've already been set back as a generational cohort in their earning power, their purchasing power. Then the pandemic hit. And then they were also glorified for being the ones who led the great resignation, right? They were the ones who said, you know what? I've lived with instability and risk all my life. I'm just going to take off and look for a better working arrangement. And they did. Now it turns out they tend to number in the highest amounts of these layoffs that are happening. There have been studies that have been coming out. Insider just did an article on it showing that these millennials are comprising the largest number of people among the layoffs that have been happening during 2022. So if you're at that age, it's most likely statistically that you don't have children yet, but you are looking to put down roots. You are looking to build your assets. And one of the things that I've found might be really good to think about is if you're laid off and you're in your 30s, start to learn about what a severance package is made of, because this is the time when you can actually clarify what your goals are. If it is to get a pile of money to give you some stability, go for it. Don't accept what was first offered to you. Go to an expert. Do not sign quickly any severance package that comes with your layoff deal, because that's exactly what the employer is looking for, an easy, clean cutoff. So take the time to find a business mentor or hire a labor lawyer to actually look at the language. And also realize that if your goal is to go to a better work arrangement, a better job, and it's not necessarily to make more money, leverage what you've given to the company that's laying you off and get them to leverage their resources to help you to find the next job. I believe it's called outsourcing resources. They can help you to find that. The other thing to think about is take a look at your own financial picture, look at your assets, look at your liabilities, try to cut down on your liabilities, because at this point in your life, in your 30s, this is the time when you need to start thinking about how you're going to support yourself in your middle age if this happens again. So again, the millennials being very familiar with instability, you should probably be able to get into the mindset that says, I am not indispensable in a capitalist economy. I am not so valued by the system that I'm not going to be considered to be let go at the next job. And then finally, probably just expecting this instability going forward. I mean, the new normal has been talked about a lot, about how people cannot count on having one career that lasts them all the way to retirement. So start thinking about what it means to have several side gigs going at once to bridge you between two main jobs. And These are some of the things that people in their 30s can think of. I think it's also the time in their lives when just expecting the unexpected more often is probably the smart thing to do going forward.
Yeah. Let's move over to you, Janine. You are dealing with the 40s age group, and as we just heard from Vivian, people want to put down roots. By the time you're in your 40s, you really want some roots. I imagine you want to have a comfortable life, and if you're let go from your job, I'm sure it's really disruptive and very scary at that stage. What is the thinking for folks who have to leave their jobs in their 40s?
So retirement is still far away when you're in the 40s. So you really have to reassess. Are you going to stay in your same career? Are you going to change careers? Do you want to start a business for yourself? Maybe that will take you for the next decade or so to make some money. But also, I'd like to piggyback on what Vivian was talking about, that severance package, because that may be able to hold you over a little bit. When a company lays you off, a lot of times they'll offer you a severance package. In my research, I was surprised to find out there's some countries in Canada, Vivian, and in the UK, companies are required to pay their employees that they lay off some money. In the United States, it's not law. So it's not required. And so a lot of them do it anyway, as a goodwill gesture to protect their brand. And a lot of times when you leave the company and take the money, they'll make you sign papers, right? Like you can't trash the company when you walk out with this bundle of money. And a lot of times the severance package is based on, your length of service there. So there's some kind of formula, like so many years of service equals how much money you'll be getting at the end of the day. And then there's unemployment claims also to help bridge that gap while you're figuring out what your next step is. You could also apply for the unemployment benefits. Of course, it's easier to find a job when you have a job, right? That saying stands. And so we were talking about maybe like at CNN where all these changes were happening. And, you need to look at the writing on the wall of these. It's not surprised that they let go of, they cut that entire channel, right? Headline News Network. So some of this was already happening. It's months in the planning, like Kristen said. You kind of have to pay attention to what's going on around you because it is easier to find a job when you have a job, right? Because then you are avoiding that difficult conversation when you go into a potential new employer about, why you got let go, but if you say, I'm still working, I'm just looking for something else, then you could kind of make your case a little bit better while you have a job. Also, I got this good tip from an HR expert who says, if you're looking for that next job, you may want to change your settings from public to personal on your social media accounts. She says that for sure, HR people look at their social media profiles. So if you're applying for jobs, they got to see where you are, what you're doing, who you're hanging out with. So even for that little time that you look in the interim between jobs while you're looking for a job, change the settings from personal to private while you're looking. Then you can put it back to public once you get hired, I guess, if it's nothing really, really outlandish that you're putting on your social media feeds. But they are going to judge you based on what you have. And also, she also says that make sure as you're applying for jobs that your LinkedIn profile matches your resume so that they look for things that are like out of whack, that this is so much experience on this, but it doesn't match your LinkedIn profile. So really make sure that everything aligns properly because they are looking for that as you search for your new career.
And maybe not.
I just want to jump in for one quick second, Roma. You guys both mentioned the severance thing, and I had the thought, remember those memes that we all saw, like, I think it was in a CNN story to your point, but like the guy who worked at whatever store for like 30 years and he thought like at the end, or they were doing layoffs or whatever, and he thought, they're going to give him some kind of package, and they walked out with these bags of like all of the company's booty. Like it was like the mug and the mouse pad, and the guy like does the video where he's like whipping the thing. Like this is why this is so important to your point about like talking about this stuff, because people just assume that they just have to take what's offered, right? Like some people get fired or some people get let go and they get nothing. But there is, I think it's just important to stress that there is some there is some leeway, and that you should definitely advocate for yourself and at least have the conversation and ask those questions, because you don't want to be stuck like that guy holding the bag full of shit from the company that just let you go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I do know somebody who did, they were offering severance packages. They dissolved the entire department. And one of my friends went in there and negotiated a better severance deal than the rest of her coworkers. So there is leeway.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know you got to get to 50 too, but employers should be cautious as well, because a Harvard Business Review found that after a layoff, there's a 20% decline in job performance among the people who survive because morale goes down. They also found, researchers at 2 universities found, downsizing a workforce by just 1% leads to 31% voluntary turnover in the next year. So people walk out the door and they go, oh, maybe I should do that too. Why am I going to be loyal if this company is going to cut me without, suddenly like that? Then I'm going to get ahead of the game.
Right. It's like rats on that sinking ship, right? the last couple of creatures left.
Very scary.
Yeah, right. I mean, if your company is not going to be loyal to you, then, you start to think, why should I be loyal to them? And, that seems to be catching on throughout a variety of sectors. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but me, I love numbers, right? Statistics. And I was looking up the chances of finding a job within a particular age group that matches the job that you left. In terms of salary and job satisfaction. And so for men aged 30 to 44, there's a 36% chance that they'll find a comparable job. For men aged 45 to 54, it's a 29% chance. And for men aged 55 to 59, only 17%. And again, we can bring that old ageism thing up again, but the older you are, the harder it is to get employed. When it comes to women, obviously the numbers are even worse. So for women 30 to 44, you got a 31% chance of reclaiming a similar job. If you're 45 to 54, it's only 20%. Now get this, if you're a woman who's 55 to 59, you're not even 60 yet. And again, these are women in the prime of their lives. There's a 9% chance that they will be reemployed to their satisfaction. That just breaks my heart to hear that. Vivian, I wanted to just circle back to you, because we sort of discussed this earlier, the whole psychological impact of losing your job. And in some cases, people need some professional help, because, eventually, if you're unemployed for a very long time, you start to think it's your fault that you're unemployed. And then it becomes a downward cycle that takes you into a place that you may have a very difficult time climbing out of.
You're right. It definitely happened to me. I think on a previous episode, I talked about one piece of advice I would give, which is, if you can afford it, and if you're in New York State, you're lucky that most insurance companies will cover it, seek mental therapy. There's something to be said for how much we are raised and socialized with the belief that we are our work. Janine, you mentioned that in Puerto Rico, people do not ask each other, what do you do, to get a sense of who you are when you're first meeting. But in American society, in North American society, that's exactly how we define ourselves. I think it's not something to sneeze at. The idea that the loss of this social setting where people not only make friends, but find meaning in the work they do. They are working together as a group, as an organization, for some higher end, right? Some bigger goal that one individual can't accomplish by themselves. That is a huge part of our lives. And so I think being aware of the toll that it could take mentally and emotionally is one good step towards trying to catch yourself from slipping. Yeah, because it's devastating. It can be absolutely devastating.
Because people put their value sometimes on what other people, the employment, right? Somebody cares about me enough to offer me a job, trust in me. And then when you let go, it's just like, where's my value? And
well, it also comes down to when people ask you, what do you do? Then what do you say, right? If you're unemployed, that really weighs into the psyche of how you feel about yourself.
Right. I'm going to talk about what happens in your 50s, because that's panic mode, right? At that point, you are thinking about retirement, although for many people it is a little too early to consider retirement. And I did look up, Fidelity had offered sort of a shorthand or sort of a rule of thumb for determining if you can afford to retire. And basically they said that by the time you're 30, you should have been able to save a year's worth of salary. So let's say you're making maybe $50,000, you should have $50,000 in savings. And by the time you're 60, they said you should have 8 times your salary. Now, obviously,
very ambitious. I don't know most people who have that kind of money.
Like I saved nothing from 20 to 30 because
really?
I just didn't make enough
this
money.
According to Fidelity.
Yeah.
And then by the time you're of retirement age, which is generally considered to be about 67 years old, you should have about 10 times an annual salary, 10 times whatever you're making. If you were making $100,000, you left your job, you should have $1 million in savings. And they're basically saying that's when you can feel comfortable, that you have a cushion in order to continue living without being burdened with the responsibility of getting a job. So that's one thing to consider. But at age 50 or in your 50s, also think about, a lot of people might have a lot of expenses, and then they're wondering, how am I going to pay for it? They've built up a nice 401k fund, their little nest egg. But also consider this: if you try to take out any money from your 401k, you're going to be hit with taxes, and on top of that, a 10% penalty. So up until the age 59 and a half. So in your 50s, it's really not a good idea to touch your 401k. I mean, that is your retirement fund. And then you might consider getting a side job, or you might consider volunteering if you can afford it, because that might open up all new avenues for you. And you should consider reworking your resume, because by the time you're in your 50s, a lot of things have changed that have passed you by, in terms of what is acceptable or what is expected by employers, who by this point, employers are probably going to be younger than you. So you kind of have to play that game. Change the resume so that it's not so chronological necessarily, and put your best experiences at the top. You don't have to take it in chronological order. I wanted to end this discussion today by taking a quote from, this is funny, Mark Cuban, who happened to be in high school with me. We were high school mates. And I have to tell you that Mark Cuban was not considered by any stretch of the imagination anyone who would be most likely to succeed in high school. In fact, I may be wrong about this, but I don't think he even graduated with us. I think he left school early, but he had a lot of failings in his life. I mean, if you know anything about him. And so here is his quote that I wanted to share with everybody, because, and I'm telling you right now, he was not a popular kid in high school, and he didn't exhibit any sign of being a success at all. So this was his quote: "From getting cut from high school basketball," and I can attest to that, "to getting fired from jobs, getting credit cards rejected and cut up, rejection has only been a distraction, not a roadblock. Every no gets me closer to a yes." So I hope, that maybe inspires some people to consider that, it's not easy in the beginning. And when all hope seems to fail you, you lost your job and you don't know where you're going to go, and you're really up in the air, you might end up like Mark Cuban and make billions of dollars and be a true success story.
Shocking.
Anyway, everybody, this was a good discussion, and thanks a lot. And folks, we'll be talking to you next time. Thanks for tuning in to The Five of Us. We want to hear from you with any questions, ideas, or suggestions for future discussions. Just write to us at the email you see here, and we will be eager to help. Talk to you next time.